It is the 31st of the 12th, 2024. That, I think, means that it's New Year's Eve, but that won't stop us because the F1 news beat never ceases. It's as hot as ever going into the 2025 season. There are, therefore, a very many F1-centric threads at which we need to pull. We're going to talk about Alonso telling Andrea Stella that Abu Dhabi this year gave you back what it took from you in 2010. That's when, of course, Fernando Alonso sat behind Vitaly Petrov, mimicking Mark Webber, as opposed to Sebastian Vettel lost one of his championships. We'll talk about that. Martin Brundle too being given an Officer of the Order of the British Empire. Finer bloody Lee. Racing News 365 have published the Constructor's Money of 2024, which has given rise to a Helmut Marko comment on Checo Perez, saying that deal, the settlement, cost Red Bull millions. Ralf Schumacher too has talked about the big risk that Lewis Hamilton is to Scuderia Ferrari going into 2025. Jacques Villeneuve coming out with his very unique brand of truth serum too, talking about Lance Stroll. So too reminiscing even on his remarks on Danny Rick way back in the day that caused much controversy. Eat SH1T was Danny Rick's response, but Jacques Villeneuve was proven to be correct, was he not? So too, an ex-Red Bull racing driver in Robert Dornbos chiming in, poo-pooing a theory that Max Verstappen might lose a tenth or two, as have so many F1 drivers before him, by dint of him becoming a father. Oh, the humanity. Should we get techier than techie things, chat? Because it is very, very techie. Racing News 365 report that as far as the Constructors' prize money in 2024, McLaren by dint to their first position, 161 million US dollars. Ferrari in second place, 151 million USD. Red Bull, however, 140 million US dollars. So there were truth to the rumour that 21 million is how much Checo Perez cost them because of his not insubstantial underperformance. To that, Helmut Marko said this because there's been a lot of speculation over the past couple of weeks around the details of their mutual agreement. How did they manage to get rid of Checo Perez? Because he had a contract, a 2-year contract. They extended him on the back of half decent performance over the first 5 races of 2024. If I recall correctly, in the first 5 races, he podiumed 4 times. But again, this is where it gets a bit weird, isn't it? As far as Checo Perez, we know that he's very, very good around street circuits. He's a street king indeed. He was always going to go well around the first 4 because that epitomised, those tracks even epitomised what Checo Perez needed from those. He's brilliant as far as feathering the throttle on the combined exit, is he not? That's where he dines. Surely then you would expect him to go well and then tail off once again when we get to the proper track, Silverstone, Spa-Francorchamps, because he's always been a rear limited driver. That's been Checo Perez. So why therefore would Red Bull give him a contract? A 2-year one? Well, of course, some would argue that it was a function of all of the destabilising factors, that the rancor, the beef between Christian and Jos Verstappen and Oliver Mintzlaff and Mark Matchsich, the Red Bull GmbH guys, that what Christian Horner needed more than anything, like a life raft even, if indeed we're talking Titanic simile and metaphor. He needed stability, and Checo Perez offered him that. There was one driver at Red Bull who indeed, when asked to give his unequivocal support to Christian Horner, there was one driver that did that, and that driver had a name. His name was one Checo Perez, man formerly known as the Mexican Minister of Defense. That's why they gave him an ill-advised 2-year contract. However, on the agreement, Dr. Helmut Marko said as follows, talking to sport.de, he says, taking into account the contract, it's agreement that is acceptable to both parties. The interviewer, the sport.de interviewer, follows up with this question. So does that agreement amount to several millions? Therefore, Marko responded thus, we are talking about F1 here, so yes, the agreement between Red Bull to cease Checo Perez's contract, of course, amounts to millions. Oh, the humanity. Lest we forget, Checo Perez's contract was circa 40 million USD per annum. Of course, therefore, to null and void it, it was going to be in that realm. Lest we forget too that Checo Perez hasn't come out of the Red Bull Racing family. He will still be there. He will still be driving the car and show runs in a pseudo ambassadorial role. Oh, the humanity. It's Techie, Miss RS, Benzi, Eddie. Go on then. Let's talk next about Brundle. Let's celebrate Martin Brundle for a second, because you guys know I'm partial to a bit of Martin Brundle, the grid walk legend of the space. Always speaks his mind to a fault. Sometimes it's about time then that he was recognised. Order of the British Empire is what he's been given in the New Year's celebrations, or whatever they're called. New Year's honours list, I think it's called now. Here's the headlines. Martin has been a mainstay of F1 broadcasting over the last 30 years, 40, nearly Cameron's Freudian slip, since 1997. The former F1 driver, listen, let me tell you, I'm not even going to read out this, awarded 4 times a BAFTA in 1998, 1999, 2005, 2006 for his F1 commentary by the Royal Television Society for his F1 punditry. Now the 65-year-old has been recognised by King Charles III in the yearly honours list. Mate, it's about bloody time, mate. F1 has been disrespected for the longest time. So too Martin Brundle, who brings that vavavu, that extra, that verve. He makes, by dint of his, by the Brundle grid walk. You've got to argue that Brundle's one of the goatiest ones, eh? Changed the game indeed. And this was never his path. He wanted to be nothing if not an F1 driver. Broadcasting was out of scope for him. Something he hadn't even considered. But he's made an industry out of it, has he not? Brundle, with his weird awkwardness on the bloody grid walk, talking to people that he clearly doesn't know. Megan Thee Stallion, Simone What's-Her-Face from Bridgerton. He doesn't care. He goes up to them and he provides us with that content, because F1 is in a weird space right now becoming mainstream. But for the longest time, it was top shelf type stuff. You couldn't even talk any F1 language to anybody in your local watering hole, because they wouldn't understand. And I would argue that as of the 31st of December 2024, that Martin Brundle is translating these very difficult, nuanced F1 conversations, lingo and terminology in a way that people outside of F1, mainstreamers, Drive to Survive fans, can well understand, bringing F1 to the mainstream. And for that, Formula One as a sporting endeavour has a lot to thank Martin Brundle. Oh, by the way, Jacques Villeneuve has come out and he's been talking again, hasn't he? Again, I feel like this dude is harnessing his career in the image of Martin Brundle. Straight shooter settings, zero PC or chill. Here's what Villeneuve has had to say. Talking about Lance Stroll first, he says that Lance Stroll needs to be liked. Does he need to improve his persona? Well, it's important to be liked in this industry, Jacques Villeneuve told Spin Casino. If you win every race like Verstappen, then you have winner privilege. Then maybe you can be liked a little bit less. But at some point, being not liked comes back to bite you. Shout out to Mice and Men. Similar thing, right? Being liked is very important. When you're liked, he says, you end up going faster because everybody behind you is pushing you, helping you. The same thing happens with the mechanics. It's a general energy. A rising tide floats all boats. So it is important that Lance improves his appeal in the media. Are you kidding me, Jacques Villeneuve? Like, no kidding. Sherlock, of course he needs to improve. He's the worst one, but does he really though? If nepotism is a thing in F1, then surely Lance Stroll is the epitome of that. Daddy owns the team. Daddy owns the business. There is no getting rid of Lance Stroll, even though every time he rocks up to an FIA official driver's press conference, you can see the death in his eyes. He doesn't want to be there. That's why you get the incidents where he jumps out the car, underperforms again, and pushes the bloody physio who's just trying to help him. Lance Stroll, I feel at this stage, is a lost cause. Nobody cares about him. He doesn't even care. Let him go and do WTA. Tennis might even be his forte at this point. Villeneuve is not the greatest. No, he's not the I mean, he's got big shoes to fill, though, in his father, hasn't he? Gilles Villeneuve. Some say that his daddy was one of the best, if not the best, racer that we've ever seen. But I digress. More pertinently on Villeneuve, he's reflected on his comments that he made about Danny Ric. Here's what he said. Remember back in the day, this season earlier, he said of Danny Ric, why is he still in F1? What is he still doing here? Danny Ric responded in kind by putting one of his best performances in quali and telling the Canadian Jacques Villeneuve to eat SH1T. Go away. Jacques Villeneuve responded first. I've never sought to be right. He told the Mirror Sport. It sparked a lot of reactions, both negative and positive, and it led to many people discussing the subject openly. It's not about destroying somebody, but one must face reality. He continues, I think people said to themselves, okay, so Jacques has a point. Let's discuss it in depth. Danny Ric and his underperformance. That's what happened, and that's what satisfies me. My feelings wouldn't have been different if Danny Ric had stayed at Red Bull. I'm not saying, oh, I'm glad he left one. I'm simply saying I'm happy to have highlighted the reality. He doesn't mess about, does he? He's not pulling any punches. And again, I would contend at this juncture that F1 needs more of that. More of the likes of Jacques Villeneuve, who aren't pulling any punches. No PC settings. I want the real stuff. I watch too much sports and football and boxing, and in those sports, the broadcasters do not pull any punches. I want the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. F1, however, thinks that we as a community cannot handle the truth. Oh, and by the way, Fernando Alonso, techie. Here's what he had to say to Andrea Stella about their victory in the Constructors' Championship as a function of Lando Norris's performance in Abu Dhabi. He said, Abu Dhabi is giving you back, Andrea Stella, what it took from us in 2010. In 2010, you'll recall, Andrea Stella then was working for Scuderia Ferrari alongside one Fernando Alonso, man from Oviedo, Asturias. Then, however, in the running for the Drivers' Championship, his third it would have been, they made a bad decision indeed. Going into the final race that year, there were several of them competing still in the running for the championship. It was Webber, it was Alonso, it was Hamilton, and it was Seb Vettel, if I recall correctly. Then, though, Alonso chose to mimic, cover off Mark Webber, because indeed he was favourite to win the bloody championship. He was ahead of Sebastian Vettel going into the 2010 season finale. Alonso covered Mark Webber, but that was the wrong decision. He should have been covering off Sebastian Vettel. In covering off Mark Webber that day at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2010, Fernando Alonso sacrificed himself a championship at the altar of poor decision making, ended up behind one Vitaly Petrov. It got techie. Again, fortuitous circumstances, though, or lack thereof, for Fernando Alonso. Some say that he's 5 points away or 8 points away from being a 5-time champion instead of a 2-time champion. Oh, the humanity at the hands of the F1 god. So too, Toto, the boy who cried wolf, has come out and talked about Fernando Alonso, saying that as soon as he heard about Lewis Hamilton, that he was leaving, the first signs were that he was getting calls from drivers. The first driver to call him about potentially sealing a seat at Mercedes, the boys and girls from Brackley and Bricks, he says was Carlos Sainz. The second driver, however, was Fernando Alonso, seeking to move teams and get himself a seat at Mercedes. They didn't do it, though, seeking, of course, to plump for youth over experience, and I'm not sure whether that's the right decision. Who did I kidnap? No one. Chris, you missed out on seeing Danny Ric in Red Bull last half of the season. Red Bull had nothing to lose, and I just feel he would have risen to the occasion in a Red Bull, mate. Who knows? Benzi says Jacques on Lance is a good one as a Canadian perspective. Oh yeah, Canadian crime. I did not see that angle. Benzi, you're right though. Go on and let me tell you about this. Robert Dornbus has chimed in. One-time F1 driver, competed for Jordan Minardi and Red Bull Racing once upon a time in 2004 through 2007. Robert Dombus has had this to say about Max Verstappen, because the theory oft put forth is that when F1 drivers become fathers, that they lose a tenth or two in pace, now seeking to mitigate for risk, understanding with maturity and responsibility. They can no longer push the car as they want to. As your first exhibit A indeed, you only want to look at Sebastian Vettel. Some say that when he became a father, that all of his pace went gonzo. In 2010 to 2013, Sebastian Vettel was one of the quickest drivers that you will ever see. Hot lap settings, he would sit there in quali and not do anything, come out last minute like Ayrton Senna used to, and nail himself a pole lap and then drive a lights to flag victory. He made a career out of it, did Sebastian. Was metronomic indeed. All of a sudden, when he became a father, coincidentally or otherwise, that pace went gone. So Sebastian Vettel was never the same. Robert Dornbus says of that for Max Verstappen, that thesis is out of scope. That the news about him becoming a father, says Dornbus, that came about prior to Abu Dhabi. And you saw in Abu Dhabi that Max Verstappen was Max Verstappen of old, that he hasn't changed. Dornbus says, well, it's nonsense, that thesis, actually, because I think he already knew that he was going to be a father before Brazil. And what about his performance in that race? What drop-off did you see then? Therefore, I would contend, however, Robert Dombos, to be a father in like when the baby's born, that's a very different level of responsibilities. You know, as a father myself of a young 4-year-old boy, it's very different when the child is born as far as your responsibility and the way that you view the world. This isn't necessarily to say that Max Verstappen is going to lose a tenth or two in pace. That would be disingenuous of me. You can never ever see that right. But some would say that the trend is your friend until there is a bend. It's techie. As everybody watched the Senna show, says Eddie. Mate, I haven't watched it, and I don't think I'm going to watch it, Eddie, if I'm honest with you. I've heard bad reports. If there is a centerpiece that I'm going to spend my hard-earned bandwidth on, if time indeed is a finite resource, no currency for an F1 content creator, I'll go back and watch the Senna film, the docu film. It's called Senna, but it's one of the best pieces of F1/motorsport footage that you'll ever watch. I can't waste it on a Netflix documentary, Eddie, where they're juxtaposing bloody Norfolk for Argentina. That doesn't make sense. I understand sometimes you've got to suspend your disbelief and there are budgetary requirements as far as production. But what are we doing here? Argentina is not Norfolk. So why? Yeah, I can't do it. I will be honest with you guys. Bit of a difference between expected a child and hat. There you go, Chris. You've summarised it infinitely more succinctly than I ever could. What's the story with Strolovic? Oh, no. Strolovic and Stroll. Oh, gosh. So go on. Here's what happened at Brazil. So Stroll hasn't been great, right? Let me tell you the stats on Stroll, by the way, because I've written them down as part of my due diligence. Stroll, okay, so this season in 2024, Stroll accumulates a net 24 points in the drivers' standings. Fernando Alonso, 70 points. Stroll from the last 11 races, 0 points. You'll recall qualifying was chaos at Brazil for Lance Stroll. He's been a chaos merchant as near as makes no difference. And then you had the race when he was off on lap 1, tried to recover it and then beached it in the bloody gravel. As if that dude didn't already have a zero racing IQ. That therefore is proof positive. How does he not know that? Lance Stroll is anything. He's a nepo baby, isn't he? He's not good enough. He's just yeah, well, I don't know. Lance Stroll needs to sort it out. And then you get Mike Crack from Aston Martin saying that the cumulative diff between Lance and Fernando, again, that it's close between them. What is he on about? What are you talking about here, Mike Crack? That makes no sense. And I could never argue that in good faith, that Lance Stroll, by dint of those numbers, has been close to Fernando Alonso. Behave yourself. Prost is painted as an angel in the show where in real life he was deplorable. Go on, Eddie, let's argue this, mate. Because I think, oh dear, Eddie, just as you're round third base, you've got me in a scorched earth bag. Look, when I was a young gun, Eddie, I thought, as you think, that Alain Prost was deplorable, that he was a snake in the grass, like politicking every single time. The story of Balestre and bloody 1989, the way that he won that championship. I bought into that thesis. However, looking back in retrospect, Alain Prost was a genius, a bona fide genius. Nico Rosberg settings, you know, those dudes that dig down and try and optimize for their chances, comb through every sinew, leave no stone unturned with a view to win races and therefore championships. That's the particular brand of sporting endeavour from which I drink. Right, that's me now. So I'm invested in Alain Prost more than I was before. I feel like there's been a narrative. They've tried to spin us a yarn on Alain Prost because, of course, every Batman needs a Joker. And if Ayrton Senna is Batman, F1's hero, the franchise player, therefore, then Alain Prost, by default, needed to be the Joker, the anti-hero, the opposite to Ayrton Senna's good guy. And I think that was a narrative of convenience. I don't think there was much underlying in that. When you listen to Alain Prost talk, you hear how he was made to be the bad guy. And again, if there is a story, there's always got to be a negative to everybody's positive. But I think that was inaccurate. I feel like that was a narrative that was spun, particularly when you hear the stories about Alain Prost going out mediums on one side of the car, bloody hards on another side, with a view to see whether there was speed in that. This dude was a genius. I'm not having it, Eddie. I don't know. I can't have it. And then you hear recently the chat that once Alain Prost left the sport in 1993, Ayrton Senna did nothing if not miss his old pal and nemesis. There's a bloody video that's just come out. F1 Reddit, go and check it out. On Senna when he's in the car in quali on the weekend when he passed away, when he met his tragic end, and he's saying over the radio, "Alain, I miss you." That they became friends after 1993. That indeed some attribute the demise of Ayrton Senna ultimately to the fact that he didn't have his rival. The reason why he was racing even was to beat Alain Prost. Some say to be Alain Prost. Real story. True thinking here on the Cameron CC. Can do long division and split times and metrics. Prost, you were scared of him being equal machinery because... Wow, Eddie, see this, Eddie. I don't want to drink from the fountain of unreason. Go on, as you round third page, let me do some more Alain Prost talk very quickly, Eddie, since you want to talk about it. Have a look at the documentary, have a look at the film. Alain Prost was always of the opinion that it was Ayrton getting the proper machinery. Alain Prost talks about seeing engines. I don't know how much truth there is in this, but I don't think Alain Prost was a fibber, a teller of porkies necessarily. Alain talks about seeing engines that had for Ayrton on there. Remember, Honda had as their guy Ayrton Senna. He was always the one, the chosen one, the good-looking one, whereas Alain Prost was the hunchback of Notre Dame. Do you know what I mean? That's how they viewed him. He wasn't the favoured one. He didn't get preferential treatment. Okay, of course, in the first instant, he was McLaren's guy. He was the legacy one. He was the one who had tenure, length and breadth as far as experience. But shortly thereafter, Ayrton became that dude, superimposing, no succeeding one. Alain Prost as McLaren's favoured child. That's why when Ron Dennis in 1989, so 1988, Ayrton Senna won the championship, and then in 1989 when it was the comeback, Alain Prost, when Ayrton Senna fell foul of reliability issues, etc., in the final or penultimate race, even at Suzuka, Ron Dennis was there protesting the disqualification of Ayrton Senna because Ayrton was the prodigal son. I disagree, Eddie. I disagree. Yeah, the engines were labelled Senna because they were... behave yourself, Eddie. I don't think that's the truth. We all know that Ayrton Senna... Even talked to Ron Dennis. Ron Dennis said that Senna was the favoured one, that he was the prodigal son. I've seen it in documentaries, but Eddie, we're going to have to agree to disagree, mate. Happy New Year's Eve, Benzi, you two. I hope you all have a fantastic 31st of December 2024. For those of you who are still in New Year's Eve all around the world, have yourself a cheeky drink for New Year's, celebrate. We'll talk before, actually. We'll be back at 8 p.m. British Standard Time, of course, or GMT, whatever it's called, discussing, pulling threads, F1-centric variety, as always. It's going to get techie as we go into 2025, I promise you, and we will always, as per usual, continue to discuss it. Between now and next time, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.